Welcome everybody to our big evening of 2 lectures. They are going to be 15 minutes each, and they are by an instructor, assistant instructor in training, who it will introduce himself shortly. But part of the requirements is that he needs to give 2 15-minute lectures. One was assigned early, and that's the first lecture. It's fish identification, and it's going to be unique to our area. So I know this is a really important topic and one you're going to love. The other topic is coral reef ecology, and he was only assigned that topic with less than 24 hours notice, and that's part of the structure of this leadership program. So I'm going to toss it over to our candidate, who will introduce himself, and after the introduction, the clock will begin. Go ahead. And hold your questions and answers, by the way. Hold your questions and answers. Feel free to type something in the chat, but we're not going to get him to address the questions until his 15 minutes is over.
Hey, thank you, Gabrielle, and thank you everyone for being here. I'm very excited. Well, my name is Victor Blanco. I am the assistant instructor in training with Lifeboard Leading and Gabrielli instructor. It's been a great journey. My background is I'm a marine biologist, so I'm pretty familiar with these topics, fortunately. Well, I graduated back in Venezuela. I'm originally from Venezuela, and I graduated as a bachelor degree in marine biology in 1999. So I've been graduated for 20 plus years. And I have always worked on my area of expertise in fisheries, protect areas management with United Nations, indigenous communities. Scuba diving has been an important part of my career since I was a child. Actually, I started diving when I was 12 years old, and it really changed my life, and that's why I became a marine biologist. So after I started working, I worked full-time with the University of Florida IFAS Extension as the Florida Sea Grant Extension Agent in Taylor County. And I'm based in Perry, here in Florida. And part of my job is to work with fisheries, and also an important part is artificial reefs. So we got some grants from the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission to do artificial reef monitoring. And as part of that, I had to improve my scuba diving certification. I had a lot of experience, but you know, I just needed to get updated with my certification. So I got to the level of dive master. And after I accomplished that dive master with SSI, I decided to move forward and become an instructor. And in that time is when I met Gabrielle. She volunteered last year to participate in the artificial reef monitoring program. And I realized that what Scuba Educators International Lifeboard Leading was doing really fits into my the way I see the world, my values and all that. So we have a lot in common. And I decided to go with her to pursue my instructor certification. But the first step is to become assistant instructor. So today, fortunately, I think I'm gonna present the last 2 requirements to get certified, which are 2 lectures of 15 minutes each. The first one is gonna be on basics of fish identification, and the second one on Coral Reef Ecology. So with further ado, I think I'm gonna start right now. So I'm gonna start the clock. So this first lecture about the basics of fish identification, I'm gonna go through some really basic aspects of what you need to look at the fish when you're underwater in order to make an easier identification based on some characteristics that are very common on the fish. And we as divers, when we are underwater, whether it's fresh water or salt water, one of the things that we want to enjoy is really the life around us. So, and fish is one of the big components of what we really want to know about. I'm gonna go through this lecture a little bit quick because it is a lot of slides, and I want to make sure I accomplish that through the time. So the first part is we need to be aware that there are all the fishes, they have different parts. They share all that in common, like, you know, we have the head, we have the body, and we have the different fins, the dorsal fin in the upper part, the pectoral fins, which are the ones for steering. And then we have the pelvic and anal fins at the bottom. And of course, the caudal fin at the end, which is the one they use for propulsion. They have the operculum, which is that part, and in this area that covers the gills, which they use to, of course, breathe. Also, a very important aspect is to check the eye and the mouth, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute. So we need to be familiar with all these parts, because this is what is going to help us identify fish while we're diving. So another aspect that is really important while we dive is the morphology of the fish. What is the shape of their body? And that shape of their body also help us identify in what part of the ocean they are more likely to be, if they're going to be at the surface or in the water column, or more associated with the bottom. So here are some different shapes. The idea is not to learn all this today, but just to make you aware that there are different shapes. And if you keep in mind when you see a fish and you don't know exactly what it is, just make sure you see how the shape it has. That's going to be a good cue. So another aspect that you need to be aware is the shape of the caudal fin. This means the one they use to propel themselves. Okay, so and these are very slight changes. Sometimes to the untrained eye, you won't be able to realize that there is a difference actually between the caudal fin of different species of fish. So here we see that they are round, truncate, emarginate, forward, lunate. Again, we don't need to learn that today, but it's just for you to know that each type of caudal fin also is related to some characteristics of the swimming capacities of the fish. So some of these fins help to swim really short distance, but very fast. Other more like very fast and long distance, and so on. Third, we have the mouth position. The mouth position also tells us about where these fish will eat. So the mouth can be in a superior position, in a terminal position, inferior position, and for some fish, they have the capability to extend their mouth to catch their prey, right? So if the mouth is in the inferior position, it's very likely that that fish is very associated with the bottom, and they will eat something that is under them or on the bottom. And then in the contrary, if the mouth is in the superior position, then they will likely ambush their prey from the bottom up, or they will be at the surface. And then terminal is more for a predatory fish. But there are other important characteristics to consider when we try to identify fish, because actually a fish will look like different species, but they're actually the same based on these characteristics, like the age. So here, for example, we see on the top right, we see a juvenile. This is a cobue, and then below it is the adult. So during different stages of their age, they will look different. Also, sometimes there will be what is called sexual dimorphism. That just means that the males and the females of the fish will look different. So this is also something we need to be aware of. Also, during their reproductive stages, some fish will have changes in their body, and the most common example is the salmon, right? And another aspect is the body marks. And here is, I think, something we really need to be more aware of. What type of marks they have, if they have stripes or bands, if those stripes or bands are vertical or horizontal, diagonal, or if they have spots, if they look marble, if they have a nice spot in the back. So all these cues will really help us differentiate one species from the other, especially within the same group. And I'm going to talk about that at the end. The eyes also give a cue for identification, their position, their color, their dimension, and the fins are, I think I already talked about that. The color, but you know, as we all know, while diving, the deeper we go, the brighter colors will be absorbed. So sometimes we won't be able to see the real colors of the fish. So not always is a good indicator for identification. But the habitat they use is also a very important way to identify these different species of fish, because it's very unlikely that you will see pelagic fish. Pelagic means that they live in the water column, you know, really close to the bottom or just lying on the bottom. So you can compare one species of fish that lives in the water column with the demersal one, that are those living associated with the bottom. And then for other fish species like catfish, the head and body ratio is also used to differentiate or to identify species. I will go real quick through the top 10 Gulf of Mexico fish species. In the Gulf of Mexico, there are about 1,500 finfish species, 51 species of sharks, and 49 species of rays and skates. And as I told you, I've been working with artificial reefs in Florida Gulf Coast. Dr. Bill Limber has identified at least 103 species in 42 families, plus 2 invasive species, one very well known, the lionfish, and more recently, a damselfish, which is called the regal the damosel. Okay, so these are 2 very important species that we need to keep an eye on, because they have a really big impact on our native species. So one of the most common species, and these top 10 that I'm going to talk about are in artificial reef in the Gulf of Mexico, is the tomtate. The tomtate is a grunt. It's a species of grunt. And the most clear characteristic is that black dot at the caudal fin, and that yellow line that goes across from the mouth all the way to the caudal fin across the eye. We will find them in very large schooling groups on artificial reef, especially when they're juveniles. But when they're adults, sometimes you can even see them, you know, as single fish swimming around, not schooling at all. And that will also depend on the time of the year. One of the most famous and people love to see in the artificial reefs in the Gulf of Mexico is the GAG grouper. The most important characteristic is the marble skin they have. The bottom picture is inside of one of the pyramids in the Boca Reef, where we go doing the monitoring all the time. And, you know, these are large fish. They will be over 8 pounds. I would say maybe 8 pounds in average or bigger. But this is a very important fish species, very common. And next we have the great snapper. Some people call it also the mangrove snapper. We are able to find this species of fish very coastal, close to the mangroves, and that's why it received that name. But also is very, very, very common and abundant in the artificial reef, pretty much in all type of materials. And one of the characteristics is that band that goes across the eye up to the dorsal fin. So, and the yellowish eye, that's very, very common. And the shape of the tail, which is, of course, the most common shape, truncate caudal fin for snappers. Then we have the graded amberjack. It's beautiful to go in the reef and see when they're schooling. We have seen them between 10 animals and up to like almost 100. And they swim. Basically, you can touch them with your hand. And when there are juveniles, as we see here in the bottom right, they look a little bit different, especially the coloration. They're silver, and as the gray snapper, they will have this line across the eye. The belted sandfish is also very, very common. They live on the artificial reef. It's a very territorial fish. They share their territory with the damselfish, and it's about 3 inches long. And the most important characteristic is that big black spot on the dorsal fin and the white spot in the belly region. Then we have the cocoa damselfish. This species will have a differentiation between the juveniles and the adults, as we see here. Juveniles will have these yellow and blue, and they can even be completely yellow, and they start turning blue as they get older. Very territorial, very easy to take pictures of them, very beautiful fish. The slippery dick is a type of labridæ. They are related to the parrotfish somehow, and they're very, very common, especially in the sandy area. So if you are around a sandy area and you're touching the bottom and you're lifting part of the sand, they will come around you and they will eat all that detritus that you're lifting from the bottom. They look like pets. Okay, and as you see, they really have different color patterns based on their faces and the different faces that or age they have. The most common that we see is that the bottom left one is the most common seen in the artificial reefs here in the Gulf of Mexico. Then we have the sand perch. They share the same areas as the slippery dick, but the best way to differentiate them is these very bright blue lines going across, and then the black bands going from the dorsal fin down to the belly. When you see a slippery dick and a sand perch, a group swimming together, it's very difficult to differentiate both of them. It looks like it's only one species, but if you look closer, you will see the difference between those two species. Then we have the white grunt. At the right, you will see the juveniles. They're very yellow at the bottom, and the best way to identify them is that blue bright line and the yellow line going across the eye. And they're wider on the dorsal part of them. So that differentiates them for the tomtates, which is the one that I talked at the beginning, especially because tomtates also have that black dot near the caudal fin. But when they become adults, they have this very characteristic shape and those bright lines and all over the face. So it's very, very simple to identify them. Then we have the cobue, the one that I talked to you at the beginning. Here we see the juvenile are very beautiful. They're about 3 to 4 inches. And then the adults are brown in color. They stay very close to the bottom and really near and under the artificial reef material. And we will see a large amount of cobue in pretty much all the artificial reef material. Then we have the hawkfish. In the Caribbean, they think this is more related to the snappers, but it's actually related to it's a labridæ, so it's more related to the parrotfish. And it's a really interesting, very characteristic species. And my time has gone. So let me
I'm going to ask you to continue your lecture. Okay.
Okay.
Go ahead and wrap it up.
Great. So, and then we have the red snapper. I'm not going to talk too much about it because we all are very familiar with them. The white spot soapfish, we can see them individuals or in groups of 3 up to 4. Those white spots and that white line in the front, in the forehead, is very characteristic, very they are very steady on the artificial reef. But sometimes we can misidentify, as I said, the slippery dick in the top and the sand perch at the bottom. So we have to be checking on the characteristic, as I was mentioning, you know, the color patterns, the caudal fin shape, the mouth position. That is some of the ways that we can differentiate these species. And this is not only for this. This will help you separate different groups of fish while you are diving. So these are just some examples of how we can differentiate some species that really look alike. Then I wanted to make you remember that there are different prominent fish groups and families. We need to, and at the end, I'm going to talk about that. They're there are different slates that you can use as a reference if you want to identify, or you can just identify them to the group level. That will be more than enough. I wanted to talk a little bit about the springfish, because when we were in Vortex, I was asking some people, how many fish species do you see? So it's really important also that we need to keep an eye on this. These are very common species that most of the time we're gonna see on the springs, the lake chopsucker or the spotted chopsucker, which really looks a lot like the lake one. The tadpole, it has an eel-like tail, caudal fin. And then we have the sunfish groups, which are the most common that we see. And it's very important to how to differentiate. For example, the bluegill is more like a disc shape of the body. The red-eared sunfish to your right, the name says it, it will have a red spot right there on the perculum. And then we have this the red-breast sunfish. So the belly is really reddish, and then this part of the perculum can have an extension that when they're older, it can expand some inches, okay? And then the spotted sunfish, the name also says it's just because we see all these spots, that's the easiest way to differentiate these four very common species, and all of these four species were in Vortex last weekend. Then we have the Worthmouth and the black crappie. The black crappie is a larger fish with golden at the bottom, very dark at the top dorsal aspect, dorsal part, I'm sorry. And then also I saw in Vortex some bass, largemouths or Florida bass. They're very common. They were juveniles. Very common as well, the pickerel. They have these gator-like head. But if you want to be more aware of the different species, I will suggest you to get some slates of, you know, with different species, so you can get more familiar with them. Another species that is really common is this one that looks like a flounder right here in the bottom center, which is called the hawk choker. And you really have to pay attention to the bottom and to the rocks, and you will see them moving around. So as divers, what I will recommend is to keep some fish slate handy and take notes when you are finishing, especially when you're finishing your dive, so you can keep track or make notes on your logbook of all these different species that you've been seeing. Some organizations like Reef, they really promote in divers to give to report the fish species that you identify in the different diving sites that you visit. So I hope this was a very informational presentation and helps you to identify fish in the future. Thank you for your attention, and I guess if you might have some questions.
Thank you, Victor. Let's open it to questions. The first question was in the chat. It was from Bill. The question was, how big can GAG grouper get?
Well, in size, and the length of it, well, what is in the references here in your area in the Gulf of Mexico, they can get in large aggregations during spawning, and it's actually is a really interesting thing to go and see in the Stinghatchee Reef, which is near my area. And they can get up, the super reproductors super spawners can get up almost more than 24, 26 inches long and even more. But I think that's about the largest average. But you know, sometimes you will find a really out of the distribution, the regular distribution length of this fish. But I would say is about that, between 26 to or 28 inches long.
Great. We have a few questions in the queue. The first question is from Jillian. If you will unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah, so I was just wondering, what should we do if we see like an invasive species? So for example, I know that lionfish are venomous, but should any action be taken on our side of things to help improve efforts to manage that invasive?
Yeah, well, the recommendation with the FDVC is that if you have the right tools to remove them, go ahead and do it. And that means you have a spear and you have the right container to put the lionfish, in this case, in that container. If you don't have those, then I won't recommend you to try to manipulate these animals, especially for what you say. You know, they have poison in their spines, venom in their spines. So if they poke you, it won't kill you, but it will hurt. And you know, safety while we're scuba diving is one of the most important aspects in our dive plan. So we don't really want to disturb our dives just because we are not aware. Also, remember, lionfish, they like to hang and they don't swim too fast. They just basically they will try to stay where they are. And if you are not aware of your surrounding and you kick it or something, you can get hurt. So always be aware of your surroundings, especially when you are around artificial reefs, because it's been determined that lionfish have a very good affiliation, a very high affiliation with artificial reef than natural reefs.
Good question, Jillian. We look forward to seeing you in the class tomorrow. The next question is from Gizem.
Hi, Victor. That was a great presentation. Thank you so much. So I was wondering, you talked about like couple of techniques for like fish identification, and I figured out like probably these slates would be really helpful. But for like beginner people, like for people who doesn't like have any information about fishes, what could be the great strategy to start?
Well, the first thing is when you are doing your dive plan, most of the time you want to have some information in advance of your dive site, right? So if you know, for example, that you're going into the Gulf, and in the Gulf you're going to a specific artificial reef, you can just Google or maybe get in contact with a diver operator or you know, some local people and ask what are the most common species, or those species that are more likely that you will find in that dive site. So you are ready and you have your short list that, okay, maybe I will see a GAG grouper, so you can be checking that list of species that you might find them there. So as a beginner, I would suggest you to, you know, just be prepared before the dive. And then if during the dive you see some species that you are not totally, you know, sure what they are in their ID, just take notes of those cues that I mentioned, you know, the shape, the color, the patterns of the colors of it has stripes, where it was living, it was swimming on the bottom. That way, when you go back to your boat, you can describe the fish to the captain or to other divers, and they will let you know what that species is.
Excellent. Thank you. There's one final question, I think. And Jimena, would you like to ask it out loud or would you like me to read it?
I'll ask it out loud.
Okay, great.
So I know in science diving, and anytime we're doing a lot of diving, you know, for work or whatever reasons, it's important to know fish IDing for various reasons. I was just wondering, like, how would we promote like recreational divers and laymen to learn their fish IDs? Like, what would be like the good reasons that we could explain to them for them to take the time to learn fish IDing, other than like, I'm going to go down and look at pretty colorful fish?
Yeah, well, that's actually really important, and is one of the reasons that why we are, for example, monitoring the artificial reefs. It's because, you know, if you have the ability to properly identify fish, and you do that and you report it, you keep track of that information, then you can, in the long term, have a trend of the abundant distribution of some specific species. And that might be a reflect if there is a direct or indirect impact on the reef or on that specific species. All right. So that's a great reason why, for example, Reef, which is the organization logo that I have here in this slide, they're promoting people to, you know, you are diving all the time, so why don't you take notes? And a very simple methodology that they have that is called the Reef roving diving methodology to do fish count, which I can explain in a different presentation. You have the relative abundance, you collect data of the relative abundance of fish. And when you share that with the specialists, they can use that information in their models for stock assessment, to propose, you know, regulations for conservation of specific areas or so on. And that's why we as divers have this very important opportunity to give back, just not only just go and of course enjoy or dive, but also if you have the ability to identify the fish, share that information with those that are going to use it for the good reasons.
All right, we are going to take just a couple more questions. I'm going to cut the questions off after this. We have a question from Brooke. Go ahead.
All right, I loved your presentation and I'm curious. First, I want to make sure that I heard it right. I thought I heard you say that you think that you've seen more lionfish at artificial reefs than at natural reefs. And if that is correct, if that's what I heard, do you think that we're going to be bumping into kind of an issue as we push towards artificial reefs for conservation, where we might be facilitating or proliferating invasive species?
Yeah, okay. So there are publications, peer-reviewed publications that have compared the fidelity of lionfish in artificial reef and natural reefs. And they have seen that there are more, they like more to hang around artificial reef. Fortunately, in our area, and I mean in the Gulf Coast of Florida, and especially in the Panhandle, they coordinate all these derbies to remove lionfish. So in the last, and they keep track of the data on that, of the abundance of fish, how they go back and restock this artificial reef that has been completely harvested. And with time, that rate of invasion has decreased. What science believe now is that the lionfish are going into deeper waters. And in my specific experience in Boca Reef for the last 4 years that we have been diving there, we haven't seen one single lionfish in the artificial reef, which is actually one of the informations that I share with the scientists and say, why, you know, there are artificial reefs reported in our other artificial reefs really near, but not there. So it seems like there are some oceanographic conditions that isolate that area. That might be one of the theories. And I totally forgot what the other thing that I was going to mention, but at the end, the thing is that, yeah, if we go to artificial reef, it's likely that we will find lionfish, but fortunately, you know, the scuba diving and the fishing community have come together and harvest enough artificial lionfish out of the artificial reefs. So it's still safe for the divers to go there, but you won't be surprised to find and see one lionfish here and there. Actually, I think they're pretty neat, cool to see, despite they're invasive, right?
All right, Victor, in less than a minute, I want you to answer the next two questions in less than a minute. The first question is, a lot of fish look similar. What's the best way, the best feature to help identify the fish? Less than a minute.
Well, it will depend. As I said, you know, basically the shape, the color patterns, and the mouth position, I would say, are the three main cues that will help you properly identify a fish quicker.
Very good. And the final question, again, less than a minute response. If you could share some of the citizen scientist organizations, you mentioned reef.org. I've belonged to that for a very long time. What are some other citizen scientist organizations that can help recreational divers learn and enjoy the beauty of all the ocean for many years to come?
Reef, as you already said, but what I would suggest is to get in contact with the FDVC Artificial Reef Program, and they will point you to the right person, because that will depend on when in Florida you are. In some areas, there are more active people than in other areas. So depending on if you want to get involved in the South, there are people working in different organizations, and Moat Marine, the Coral Reef Conservation Reef. And then if you go to the Panhandle, you have Mexico Beach organization, in the Pensacola area, a couple of dive clubs. So it will just go to FDVC Artificial Reef Program, get in contact with them, and they will point you to the right person.
Yeah, in Tallahassee, we have Organization for Artificial Reefs as well. So
that's correct.
All right, very good. Let's give Victor a round of applause as he cues up his next presentation, his final presentation. Victor, that was excellent. Thank you very much. And I'd actually like to have you back sometime for a longer session, because I thought that was really interesting and well done.
Yeah, that
Yay,
was
lots of applause from people. Thank you. This next topic, Victor was given very little notice, less than 24 hours. It's one of the requirements, less than 24 hours to prepare. And Victor, you have 15 minutes to tell us what you can about coral reef ecology.
Okay, so this topic about coral reef ecology, the first thing that comes to my mind is that we need to make sure we know first, what is a coral? Second, what is a reef? And third, what is ecology? And then when we know what those three things are, then we can talk like, okay, what is coral reef ecology? All right. And then the final and most important question for our presentation is, why is that important for us as scuba divers, right? So let's start with what is a coral. And you know, when this is really interesting, because when you ask different people, depending on how much they've been exposed to the ocean, you say, what is a coral? And some people say, hey, it's a rock. Oh no, it's a plant, or it's an animal. Or maybe it's all of them. Well, perhaps, you know, because actually it is a very interesting creature. But the reality is that it's an invertebrate. Is one of the more evolved, very simple body, but very good design. You know, Mother Nature and God did a great job with this group of animals, which belong to a phylum that is called Cnidaria. All right. And it includes different groups like, you know, the bugfish, the hydrozoans, the anemones, the stony corals, and the soft corals, right? So, but some things that they have in common is that all that rock is actually a colony, is not a one single animal, is a community of organisms living together as one. And that's what we see. And that's what is so interesting about this group. And all this, the single animal is what we call the polyp. So each polyp is a single individual. And that individual, in the case of the stony corals, the ones that I'm picturing here, they have at the base, they stay on a place that is called a teca, that is they built as they grow. And then they have a very a center area that is that their stomach is an invagination of their tissue, and then in the mouth they have is surrounded by some tentacles, and then on the sides other will grow around that polyp. Okay, one of the most interesting aspects of corals is the symbiosis they have with an algae that is called the zooxanthellae. So they will take the zooxanthellae directly from the water, and then the zooxanthellae, which is an algae, is a producer, right? Using the sunlight, it will have photosynthesis, and then that will feed actually the partially 80% of the metabolism energy comes from the zooxanthellae, and that's why it's so important that relationship they have. But another way that these animals have to feed themselves is in the tentacles. They have these specialized cells called nematocysts that are retractile. And then when they feel a potential prey or they're disturbed, that they send like a spear, right? And that's when you touch the, which we don't recommend to do, of course. But if you have ever touched a coral, that's stinky feeling it comes from these specialized cells. So there are two big groups of corals, the hard corals, which are called erematipic corals, and that means that those group of corals are the ones that build reefs. Okay, so the hard corals are the ones that build reefs. And then we have the soft corals that are called aeromatipic coral, which is just a complement, but they don't really build a reef. Okay, and here we see some examples of both of them. Okay, at the top, we see some aeromatipic like staghorn, plate coral, elkhorn coral, and then at the bottom, we see some examples of soft coral. But also we can, when it comes to identify hard corals, that is a complete science. Okay, we are not going to go that deep because even myself, I don't know, and I've been a marine biologist for many years, I don't know how to identify this down to a species, but yes, to a group is very simple. So we have all these 7 groups. We have the like what is called the brain corals. Those are mandarin. It means that they have these wrinkles. And then we have the plates, the branching, like the elkhorn. We have the columnar, which are very common here in the Gulf of Mexico. Digitates and encrusting, also very common in the Gulf of Mexico. And then the massive types. Okay, they all belong to the class Anthozoa, and there are more than 6,100 described species. So imagine how difficult it would be to really identify this species. But that's not our goal today, to identify them. Is to talk about their ecology. So where are all these corals located? They're all located basically in the intertropical region of the world, you know, along every ocean and sea and close sea. And here in the in the Gulf of Mexico, we have some very restricted regions that have really created what is called reefs. Okay, one thing is that we go and dive and we see some corals here and there, but there are not real reefs. So only we have the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary is what is considered a reef here in the south of Florida. So these reefs are created by calcium carbonate sterols of these live corals. As they grow, they will take the carbonate from the water and they will sink that to build their structure. And that's also a way to sink carbon, right? They provide the reefs, they provide vertical relief and habitat complexity. And that is one of the most interesting aspects of this ecosystem, because that complexity is what makes it actually the most biodiverse of all the coastal marine ecosystems in the world. So it supports really high diverse communities. And in Florida, it's the only tropical shallow water reef system in North America. There are different ways that these reefs are built, and it will depend on geological aspects. So they're described as fringing, which grow close to the shore. Then we have barrier reef that also grow close to the shore, but there is a lagoon between the reef and the shore. And then we have the atolls. We don't have here in the Pacific. There's several of them, which is just a ring of coral surrounded by a lagoon that usually is related to a submerged mountain or volcano. But when we talk about ecology, is the interaction among the system and among the species that are there. So coral reef in the coast, they don't work alone. They are very related to all other coastal and marine ecosystems like seagrasses, marshes, and mangroves, and they work together in this case for coastal defense, besides holding a high biodiversity in them. So coral reef reduce the wave energy by 97%. And then the rest of the other more coastal systems will also help reduce the effect of erosion made by waves in this case. But also the coral reef protect these other systems like seagrasses and mangroves and upper ecosystems, which is great. So this coral reef provide us as humans with an invaluable, no, that's not the right word. Valuable, yeah, and I don't know if I'm saying that right, but ecosystem services, right? Those ecosystem services is because they provide food and fishing areas, as I was mentioned, for coastal protection. They even provide chemicals that are used in medicines. Okay, and then also one of the most important is the tourism industry that is related to these systems. So all these activities that are surrounding artificial reef has an economic value that is nearly 400 billion a year to millions of people in economic goods and services. So that's if we try to put that into in the amount of money, that's the value of artificial reef. And it's important to mention that only 1% of all the ocean surface is covered by artificial reef, by coral reefs. So it's a very, very critical system, and it can be very easily destroyed if we don't take good care of it. So these systems are under the threat of different threats, and I'm going to mention 3 of them. First is climate change. We all know that the warming of the ocean has an impact because it causes thermal stress, the sea level rise, and changes in the storm patterns, in the precipitation, the currents, ocean acidification. All these elements that are changing in our climate have an impact on the coral reef, and I'm going to mention those later. Also, the overfishing is a very important threat to the coral reefs because, you know, people use anchors, there's indiscriminated fishing, you know, they remove the big spawners, the aggregation. Fishermen leave marine debris, and which is called ghost fishing. They keep fishing and killing organisms that are not consumed by humans. So all this is part of the impacts that we have on the reefs. And then we have the land-based source of pollution, which are all kind, you know, from agriculture, rock construction, oil and chemicals, like we have the spill here, deforestation, name it. All these have an impact on water quality, and corals are very sensitive to changes in water quality conditions. So all these impacts, nutrients, and ocean acidification, global warming, they create some impacts, direct impacts on the corals, like coral bleaching, which is when the zooxanthellae leaves the polyp because it's too warm, and then as the coral depends 80% of their energy based on the zooxanthellae, they will die. So coral bleaching is a really big problem. Then we have the stony coral tissue loss disease, which is a more recent disease that is being actually spreading, as we see in the bottom right, how it has been affecting all the reef system in South Florida. And there is a big effort to understand how to control this disease and how to restore the reefs as well. What are we doing to, to save the coral reefs? Then there are some efforts for restoration. Different organizations, especially in the South, they're being investing a lot of time, a lot of resources on restoration for coral reefs. And we have here some of those, like Coral Restoration Foundation and the MOAT program for reef. I was in their facility in the Keys, and they do fracking, which is just like cutting and letting them grow. What they found is that when they break into small pieces, it increased the growth rates. So one piece itself would have grown less that it was broken into smaller pieces, and that's exactly what they're doing. Depending on the species, they will put in like on stacks on the bottom. Sorry. Or they will hang these like coral trees, what they call. And for divers, there is a big opportunity to go there and volunteer to help, just clean or do the fracking, do the helping these organizations to keep their program running. So what about artificial reefs? So artificial reefs are not really reefs, and at least for me, it's just a structure that we're putting down in the water. But these artificial reefs don't really, build a reef as we know as coral reef. They just are really helpful to attract fish. They will provide a surface for other marine organisms to grow, but I think the term is being misused for this type of resource. So we as divers, we need to be ambassadors to preserve the coral reefs. Buoyancy is the key. Remember, every time we go diving on areas with reef, we need to be very aware of controlling our buoyancy. Make sure you clip all your, octopus and your gauge to your BCD so it's not dragging on the reef. And please help clean up the reef. Take with you whatever you find. If you find any debris, any trash, just take it, put it in your BCD bag and pocket, and then bring it up with you. By doing this, we are all doing good. Volunteer with these organizations. And there is another way, if you have these plates in Florida to protect your reef, part of the money that you put down for this program goes actually to fund the artificial reef program and coral reef restoration programs in the state. So as the divers, we need to be very aware of how we need to how we can help to protect this important marine system. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Victor. All right, go ahead and stop sharing so we can see your face. We're gonna open it up to question and answers. I do have the Protect Our Reefs license plate on my scuba van, by the way. So let's hear from the audience. Any questions you have for Victor? I see some applause. Any questions? Let me ask you a question while we're waiting on other questions. You said that the only real coral reefs in Florida are in the Keys, but what about the reefs in South Florida? Are you including that?
Yeah, well, they're all considered as part of one big system. So it's not the Keys. It's all that reef goes all the way up. I think even upper Brevard County.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've found them to be like, I love the reefs in South Florida. I find them to be more pristine than the Keys, which I've seen decline. The Keys have declined pretty significantly for all the reasons that you mentioned. So let's open it up to questions. Any questions for Victor?
So Victor, you mentioned a couple of times about how warming water is detrimental to the reefs. What is the right temperature for reefs to prosper?
Okay, usually, you know, the water temperature in the tropics will fluctuate between 23 degrees Celsius and 32 degrees. So anything that is above 35 degrees Celsius, it will be detrimental for the conditions of the corals, and it might affect you know, that symbiosis that the polyps have with the Zooxanthellae algae in them. So I'm sorry, I'm very used to use Celsius.
So 35 degrees is
Fahrenheit.
approximately what, 100 degrees in Fahrenheit?
I think it's going to be about 100
Yeah.
degrees Fahrenheit. Yeah.
A quick little thing I do is times 2 plus 30 or 32 approximately. It's just a rough translation. Good question, Bill. Who else?
Victor, thanks again. And I want to say something that I really appreciated that you included almost every photo in your slides, a reference, like where did you take it from? I really appreciate it. It's a really nice practice. My question is like, I don't know so much about coral reefs because like when I was living in Turkey, we didn't even near sea in the hometown I've been in, and I started to hear more and more about coral reefs when I moved in the United States. So I was wondering, because we had a spring break trip to Keys and everybody was talking about bleached coral reefs, as you talked about it. I was wondering, once it started, is there any way to, you know, heal them? If I don't know if it's the correct terminology, like, you know, heal them, or like once they started to bleach, is it too late? Like,
well, the reality is that it will depend on how long is the stress on the coral that caused the bleaching. You know, so the bleaching, let's say the bleaching is the exit of the Zooxanthellae out of the polyp, right? So that process might be for a short time, and then the polyp might regain the Zooxanthellae and you know, continue their processes. All right, remember that at least 20% of their energy they get it from, you know, getting particles from the water, detritus, and small particles that they eat, and they can survive. The polyp can survive out of it, but not for a long time. That's why it's very important that if that process is short, then it can be restored. If that past that threshold, how long that time is, I'm not really sure, But once that pass the threshold, then the polyp would die. And the only solution would be to do some restoration, like, you know, planting some corals back and expecting the conditions to go back to the original conditions. I'm talking about the water temperature in this case. Okay.
Very good. We have a question from Santiago. If you would please unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Hi, Victor. How are you? Thank you very much by your lecture. Sorry, I'd be late here, but I take some of your words. Thank you very much. I have a question. What's your opinion about the implementation of artificial reefs? What are the pros and cons you see on that question that is very polemical here in Brazil? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Santiago. And just to let you all know, Santiago and I, we studied together the whole career in Venezuela. Santiago is from Bogota and Colombia, but now he lives in Brazil and he's an expert in sharks. He runs a shark lab in a university in the south of Brazil right now. So he's a friend of life. Thank you, Santi.
Awesome. My dad just came back from Brazil. Brazil is very much in my family, so it's nice to have you here, Santiago.
Yeah. So going back to your question, Santi, yes, it is very controversial because it will depend on what's the goal of the artificial reef. So, and that's the difference. What you're going to build the artificial reef for. So if you think you're going to build an artificial reef to restore a natural coral reef, I don't think that's really a goal that can be accomplished by its own, but because it has to be, complemented with some restoration efforts, like planting, a species of coral in order to make it grow. But if you are using an artificial reef program to attract fish and to focus the fishing effort in one specific area, then or to promote diving or fishing, then that's I think is going to be a good way to go. Here in Florida, there are many other reasons or goals for artificial reef. More recently, for example, we have the memorial reefs. There is for people just to bury their beloved ones and for divers to go and enjoy these places. There are underwater museums reef. So it's just for diving as well. So it will depend. There is a lot of information, a lot of research that's being done. If you want more information, I'm more than willing to share some of these reference with you, so you can share and the information with some people who might be interested about this topic.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions?
This isn't a question. Well, it's I guess sort of a question and sort of a statement. Victor, I noticed that you very humbly did not mention IFIS at all in either of these two. And before I even met Victor, I have been following IFIS, and I initially started doing it here in Tallahassee because plants are great. And then I was like, what is this? They also do plant life, quote, quote, in the water. And so Victor's doing a scallop thing coming up. So you haven't plugged that yet. So you should. Unfortunately, I can't. Was it this week? I'm sorry. Whenever it was, I can't participate, but I totally have been wanting to do that forever. And I'm so sad that I can't do it. But anyway, the various IFIS locations throughout Florida, particularly obviously the ones along coastal lines, do a lot of these citizen science things. And I participated in one in South Florida, and it was for coral, it was for stony coral tissue loss disease identification, but they also assisted with you in identifying other diseases and then being a part of this citizen science community. And the woman who teaches it is wonderful, amazing. And they're Zooms, like, and they're recorded, so you can go ahead and like go on there and figure out how to do it. But then also now that they've been meeting in person, like I actually went down there and dove for, I think it was like $15, and I think the $15 was just so people wouldn't pull out because they have to pay for it. But we went and did 2 dives. We dived twice, and we did 2 dives out in the Keys. And it was amazing. They teach you everything above water, and then they teach you everything under the water, and just little tiny helpful things. So she had bought these like mini clipboards that are plastic, and you could take them under the water with you. And then she had laminated things. So kind of like what you were doing with the fish thing, we had done that in my science diver class. So if you're going somewhere, like Victor said, you can like try to look up the different fish of that area and kind of get your basic however many fit on like a laminate card, and then maybe make like another card where you can write stuff on. But anyway, amazing organization. Follow IFAS, follow Victor. They're awesome. And I guess the other thing I was going to say is like, what are, sort of going back to the fish ID thing, like what are good ways for people to or good sites that they can go on to help them to properly identify the various corals that they are out there, and then also maybe identify some of the diseases or issues that they're experiencing, and then where can they go and again upload this information to help out with keeping our coral reef safe.
Yeah, thank you, Jimena. And yeah, of course, well, I try to keep my things separated, but yeah, you know, as a Florida Sea Grant agent and UF-IFAS extension, we try to do a good job, especially in the coastal area. We cover 17 counties, coastal counties. We have agents all around the state, and that we do all kind of things. And Anna Sangronis is the one who's leading the initiative of a stony coral tissue loss disease in South Florida, and she that's just do great. You know, it's just something like we do here for the artificial reef monitoring. So keeping that information. If you don't feel comfortable like trying to identify, at least share the information, take pictures, take videos, and you can go to FDAX, the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, and that's FDP, sorry, and FWC, and just they will have, if you Google like tissue loss disease or UF-IFAS extension or Florida Sea Grant, and you Google bleaching stony coral tissue loss disease, you will find the right person, so you can share the videos and pictures. And if you have the name of the location or the coordinates, you can share that so they can keep track, because they're trying to build a GIS, a Geographic Information System. So filling that information in is really important to get some good models about the reefs in this case, which is what we're talking about.
Very good. And Ronnie typed a resource in the chat box, icareaboutcoral.org, as a good site to check out.
Yep.
Any final questions before we say thank you and good night to Victor?
So when I was looking into coral reef ecology, there was this other algae that was talked about. So you mentioned the zooxanthellae, but there was another one called the crustose coralline algae. I wonder if you could tell us anything about that. Yeah, well,
you know, most of the time, this symbiosis between the corals and the zooxanthellae that died dinoflagellate, right? So, but some other species of microalgae, diatoms, also will do the same work as the zooxanthellae. So there are actually way more species. The zooxanthellae is like the most common, the one that people talk about the most. But yes, there are other actually in different groups. It's not a dinoflagellate, but it's a diatom, which is a different group of microalgae that also do the same work.
Great. Any last questions for Victor? All right, if you don't mind, everyone, just turn your cameras on for a moment and I'm going to get a group photo. Okay, symbolizing, capturing the capturing the moment when Victor is getting this much closer to his assistant instructor certification and his audience. Ryan, Jan, Jimena, if you don't mind showing us your faces, awesome.
I will. I had just put food in my mouth.
I know, I get
Sorry.
it. It's dinner time.
Okay.
All right, everybody smile. Okay, give okay signs. Cute. You guys look great. Yay. Okay. Thank you, Victor. You did a beautiful job. Beautiful job.
Thank you, everyone.
Yes,
Hope
that
you
was
enjoy it.
so
I think
excellent.
these are really is a good way for us as diver community to to understand better how important are these topics and how what the role we play as divers in the ocean conservation.
Absolutely. All right. At this point, I'm going to stop the recording. I'm going to say thank you, guests. You can go ahead and log off. The leadership team, stick around.